The sun was descending toward the horizon above Maple Avenue, casting the tranquil suburban street in hues of gold. From a distance, the scene appeared peaceful. Manicured lawns, white picket fences, the quietness of a typical small American neighborhood. Yet beyond one fractured sidewalk and a weathered white porch, the tranquility shattered with the sound of a sob so fragile and quivering it might have been mistaken for the breeze. A young boy stood in that spot, gripping a threadbare teddy bear, his eyes crimson and puffy, his voice piercing the quiet. "He hit my grandma," he murmured. And those words held sufficient anguish to demolish the serenity of the world. If you believe no child should ever weep from terror, that compassion and bravery can still transform lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to Untold Stories 0.4, where we remind the world that empathy is the most powerful force of all. The boy's name was Ethan, merely 6 years of age. His hoodie bore streaks of dirt from where he had tumbled while rushing down the stairs. Behind him, seated weakly upon the porch, was his grandmother, Clara, her delicate blue dress ripped at the shoulder, a bruise deepening across one side of her face. She cradled her arm and attempted to conceal her suffering from him, but she couldn't mask what had already transpired. In the doorway loomed a man, towering, flushed, and partially intoxicated, gripping a beer bottle, staring at the boy as if he'd uttered a forbidden revelation. His name was Ray. He wasn't related by blood, merely someone who'd pledged to assist after Clara's husband had died. Instead, he delivered fury, domination, and suffering. Ethan fled from the house that afternoon without shoes, his tiny hands clasping the teddy bear his grandmother had stitched for him during better days. He didn't know his destination. He only understood someone needed to intervene. His tears splashed onto the pavement as he stumbled along the front walkway. And that's when the rumbling began. The profound, thundering roar of engines saturated the air, cutting through the stillness like an approaching tempest. 6 motorcycles rounded the corner, gleaming in the sunlight, roaring nearer until they halted directly before Clara's house. The man leading them was impossible to overlook. A tall, powerfully built biker with a salt and pepper beard and tattoos winding down his arms like ancient battle scars. The words "Hell's Angels" were embroidered across the back of his leather vest, and beneath that a smaller patch that read, "R.L. CHLS." His name was Reed, the sort of man whose mere presence hushed noise and awakened something primal in the atmosphere. When he noticed the boy weeping beside the steps, he cut the engine, swung his leg off the bike, and knelt down. "Hey buddy," he said gently, his gravelly voice carrying both warmth and gravity. "What happened?" Ethan didn't respond with language at first. He simply gestured toward the porch, toward the shaking elderly woman seated on the step and the man standing over her, bottle still in hand. Reed's jaw clenched. Within him, something familiar and agonizing ignited. He had witnessed this kind of brutality before, in his own history, in his own home when he was too young to do anything except weep. But now he wasn't young and nobody, not while he was present, was going to make a child weep like that again. Reed gradually rose, his gaze never departing from the intoxicated man on the porch. The remainder of his crew, 5 men in black vests, stood behind him in silence, a barrier of quiet condemnation and strength. The neighborhood was observing now. Curtains shifted, doors opened slightly. Everyone could sense what was approaching. Ray attempted to straighten himself, his false courage wavering between arrogance and terror. "This ain't your business," he muttered, his voice wavering. But Reed simply walked forward, composed, measured, unstoppable. The sunlight struck the chrome on his vest as he stopped at the lowest step, looking upward. "It became my business," he said quietly, "the moment I heard a child speak those words." Ray's hand shook, the beer bottle descending slowly. He glanced at Clara, the woman whose generosity he'd destroyed, and then at the child who had fled to strangers for rescue. His lips trembled with some distorted excuse that never escaped his throat. Because in that instant, the truth stood before him, not in language but in presence. A row of men who had once been shattered but had reconstructed themselves into protectors for others. Ethan stood behind Reed, still gripping his teddy bear, watching the man who had harmed his grandma diminish for the first time. Reed didn't need to elevate his voice or his fists. The gravity of what he embodied, justice, protection, brotherhood, was sufficient. He leaned closer to Ray, voice calm but piercing. "She doesn't need your help anymore. Pack your things. You're done here." Ray retreated one step, then another. No one prevented him when he stumbled inside to retrieve his truck keys and drove away down the street. The sound of the engine diminished, and for the first time that day there was tranquility. Reed turned back toward Clara. He knelt again, this time beside her. She attempted to smile through her anguish. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "Ma'am," he interrupted gently, "no one should ever have to live in fear. Not you. Not him." His voice faltered just slightly as he looked at Ethan. Then he gestured to his men, who stepped forward quietly, one of them extending a water bottle, another producing a first aid kit. Neighbors observed as a group of men society often labeled dangerous displayed more gentleness than the world anticipated. They attended to Clara, summoned for help, ensured she was secure. When the ambulance arrived, Reed remained behind with Ethan, sitting on the steps, speaking softly while the sun descended into the horizon. The boy finally smiled, just a small, delicate smile, but it was enough to make Reed's throat constrict. As the paramedics assisted Clara into the vehicle, Ethan ran to Reed and embraced him tightly around the arm. "Thank you," he whispered, clutching his teddy bear. Reed looked down at him and simply nodded. When the ambulance departed, the bikers mounted their motorcycles again. But before Reed started his engine, he glanced once more at the house, at the little boy waving from the porch, at the elderly woman safe inside. He didn't voice it aloud, but the thought reverberated through him. Sometimes the most profound acts of compassion are performed by those the world least expects. He revved his bike once, the roar reverberating down Maple Avenue, not as a threat, but as a promise that compassion still rides where it's needed. If this story moved your heart or reminded you that strength and empathy can emerge from the most unlikely people, please like, share, and subscribe to Untold Stories 0.4, where genuine courage begins with simple compassion. Before you leave, comment below. What would you have done if you heard a child cry those words? Because sometimes one person's bravery can change everything.